or you take live for this webinar, please fill out the attendance form using Google Form link and evaluation form at the last session of this webinar. E-certificate for eligible participation will be given in 3 weeks' time. We welcome participants and audience to use the chat box feature to post your questions together with name, country, and speaker. We will choose the relevant question to our facilitator to respond. Good news to all, we have giveaways in this webinar. There are 5 criteria to win the giveaways. How to win the giveaways? First, register for webinar as participant and complete evaluation form within 2 hours. Like our SimioXM Facebook page. Screenshot all 3 presentations. Upload the screenshots on your own Facebook page and tag SimioXM. Complete this sentence. I think statistical thinking is important because not more than 20 words on your own Facebook page and tag SimioXM. Winners will be announced in SimioXM Facebook page. All the best. Okay. Now we will start the session with welcoming remarks from our Center Director of SimioXM, Dr. Sajahan bin Asanakuti. Over to you, Doctor.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and a very good morning to Mr. Amran bin Mahdi, the Deputy Director of Administration Division, Dr. Mariam binti Osman, Deputy Director Research and Development, Dr. Wan Nur Azmin, Deputy Director of Training Program, SimioXM, and to the respectable speakers, Assistant Professor Nuriza Hazlin Muslim from Kuala Lumpur Metropolitan University College, Malaysia, Associate Professor Dr. Nur Hidayu Mahat from University Utara Malaysia, and Mr. Ahmad Badrun Kurnia from School of Teacher Training and Education, Teachers Association of the Republic of Indonesia. And not forgetting our team, Ms. Sivaranjini, Specialist Moderator of this webinar, all specialists, staff of SimioXM, and participants from Simio countries. Ladies and gentlemen, a virtual hello and a warm welcome to all of you. The Center takes great pleasure in thanking all the speakers and the entire team of the SimioXM in organizing this webinar entitled Statistical Thinking Application in Education. With the continuous support from all of you, implementation of our program via online during pandemic is still possible. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been an increasingly strong call from practicing statisticians for statistical education to focus more on statistical thinking. They mentioned that the traditional approach of teaching, which has focused on the development of skills, has failed to produce an ability to think statistically. Statistics is used in almost all fields of work, such as biology, agriculture, business, economics, medicine, games, etc., to arrive at a meaningful collection from data to guide appropriate action measures. The use of statistical thinking has been recently highlighted due to its potential to increase organizations' competitiveness by means of overcoming challenges related to product and process improvement. Statistical thinking is a reasoning that focuses on the understanding of the clear presence of variation in all activities and on the perception on the production as a series of interconnected processes. Thus, the statistical thinking enables the identification, characterization, control, and reduction of variability in process as an opportunity for improvement. Solution offered for changing this situation include employing a greater variety of learning methods at school level and compelling students to experience statistical thinking by dealing with the real-world problems and issues. For example, with the data and graphs we see every day regarding the COVID-19 cases all over the world, this statistical thinking is relevant and would increase the awareness of a student on the implication of the pandemic and the meaning of flattening the curve. Moreover, statistical thinking skills will also facilitate in finding solutions not only for the current pandemic but also to everyday solutions. With that, we hope that our webinar today will be beneficial to you. Stay tuned throughout the webinar to hear more on statistical thinking application in education as well as with our upcoming programs. Thank you. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you to our Center Director, Dr. Sajahan bin Asanakuti. Okay, next. We call upon our facilitator, Assistant Professor Dr. Noliza Hasnin Muslim from Malaysia to give a speech and begin the webinar.
Good morning and Assalamualaikum.
Assistant Professor Dr. Noliza Hasnin Muslim is the Dean Center of Language, Education and Graduate Studies and Head of Academic Compliance and Quality Assurance, Kuala Lumpur Metropolitan University College. She completed her Masters in Management at University Putra Malaysia and Doctor of Philosophy in Education at University of Boston. She has 13 years experience working as a teacher and now as a lecturer in Kuala Lumpur Metropolitan University College. Welcome, Dr. Noliza Hasnin Muslim.
We are here today to discuss on enhancing statistical thinking among young people, from preschool to secondary school. In today's environment, understanding statistics is crucial. We are living in the world surrounded by data and information. The explosion of data and information giving us an insight of using data and information in decision making. Doesn't matter what type of decision.
No.
We are bound to data and information to ensure that we make sound and informed decisions. In a nutshell, any decision has to be made based on data and information. Okay, what is statistical thinking? Statistical thinking is the ability to align one's thought with the idea of basic statistics. Statistics involve data comprises of numbers. Thus, statistical thinking is to align the way we look at numbers and turn numbers into valuable information, analyzing data by making description, inferences, and interpretation will help us to come up with a conclusion that can be used in making decisions. Let's say we have numbers in the form of data. First, we have to arrange the data so that the data are presentable and readable. Numbers can be arranged into frequency table and can be presented in the form of table, pie chart, pictograph, bar graph, and line graph. We can do so many things with data that we have. We can describe phenomena, we can make inference, and we can build hypotheses. It doesn't have to be sophisticated to start off managing data. Data become useful only when we analyze it so that we can draw conclusion and make generalization where possible. Statistical thinking is a skill that can be developed. We use it in our daily life whether we realize it or not. Actually, we use statistical thinking to a large extent in our daily life. Analyzing things happen around us will help us to go to the root cause or sources of variation in the system effectively. How to develop statistical thinking? Some people might think that instilling statistical thinking is somewhat complicated and think that only be done in the university level. Statistical thinking can be instilled at a very young age. At preschool level, we can start instilling statistical thinking by encouraging children to observe, describe, analyze, and make conclusions. I would like to share with you my experience with a preschool somewhat 30 years ago. He loves to watch cartoon. So instead of letting him watching cartoons every day by not doing anything with it, I was thinking that I would like to turn those activities into a meaningful one. So one day, before I leave him at home with a babysitter, I asked him to watch cartoon and tell me what he understand about the videos. It is Tom and Jerry videos. When I came back for lunch, I asked him to describe what he learned from the videos. The answer caught my attention. He said, in all the videos, Tom and Jerry's video, he found that Tom, a cat, was mean. He liked to tease Jerry and scare off the mouse. So Tom is mean and Jerry is the victim. He made a conclusion that cat is mean and mouse is the victim. Thus, cat and mouse cannot live in the same place together. So much later along the years, we have a cat. We called him Snowy. In the house, and my daughter wanted to have hamsters. He warned his sister about not having the cat and the hamsters in the same place. My daughter got her hamster when a friend gave her one, and later Snowy started to go around and the hamster tried to get out of the cage. So he was like reminding us on Tom and Jerry thing, and at last we give away the hamsters as they love Snowy more. So the question now is how to develop statistical thinking. When to start, what age to start is subjective. We can start as early as possible by encouraging children to be observant. Encourage to ask questions, what, how, and why. Things happen the way it happens. Encourage them to be creative and critical as early as possible. When we teach to be observant, we also encourage them to gather data. We should enhance the quantitative literacy right from the beginning. We should teach them how to handle data that they collected. We build statistical thinking informally and later formalize it in a systematic way suggested by statistics. Another example, encourage them to observe the color of leaves. So they will conclude that most of the leaves are green. So encourage them to ask, why is it green? Parents can have explained by telling them that the green color is due to chlorophyll. They might not understand the reasoning part, but later in their life, when they go to primary school, they will encounter the chlorophyll thing and the memory will come back. It will facilitate learning at later stage. At preschool level, teachers should start to instill statistical sense by asking them to gather data on things and things that they like. For example, food they like to eat, food with carbohydrate, food with protein, food with fat, food with vitamins, fruit they like, fruit that can make juices, toys that they have at home, clothes they have in the closet, and other things that are familiar to them. What we do here is introducing data sense to the children. Data are more than just numbers. Statistics change numbers into information. When we ask the children to observe and to ask questions, they might not understand the reasoning part, but the practice is to encourage them to always think that what happened is happening because of some reason, or there must be a root to the things happening. Statistical thinking allow us to look at the root cause or sources of variation in the system effectively. More than 50 years ago, a mathematician called Samuel S. said that one day skills of statistical thinking will be as important as the skills of reading and writing. This time has now come, the age of digitalization. Let us discuss on the formality side of instilling statistical thinking among preschoolers. The curriculum standards include pre-numerical activities such as identifying attributes, sorting and classification. It also includes early numerical activities such as counting and determining the more and the less. This is the very basic statistical ideas. Although not specifically tied to data analysis, these activities are clearly precursors for collecting and analyzing data. Not all curriculum all over the world explicitly involve with the statistical problem-solving process. Formulate question, collect data, analyze data, interpret results, but more or less the standards are similar. Teachers play an important role. In many cases, teachers focus their attention on having students collect and represent data, but spend little time on having students pose questions or interpret the data. This represents a significant disconnect between what happens in the real world when people collect and analyze data and what happens in the classroom. Generally, when one is collecting data in the real world, one is motivated by a genuine problem, and one would not neglect the interpret phase of the process because one needs to consider whether the results found would be stable across other situations, or if not, what variables would induce changes in the data. The collect and represent data phases that are emphasized in classroom can take an enormous amount of time and material, so it is desirable to get as much as possible out of each instance of data collection and analysis by attending to the first and fourth stages of the statistical problem solving process, which is planning, collecting, analyzing, and interpreting. At first glance, it may seem that asking young children to pose questions is unrealistic, as they are unlikely to come up with questions for which they can actually collect and analyze data. However, the only way for children to learn to pose reasonable questions is to practice posing and discussing questions. Hence, teachers should start the process by encouraging students to ask questions that have personal relevance. Teachers, as well as parents, should assist children in shaping answerable questions so that they will have more motivation to follow through with the entire statistical problem-solving process. What it is ideal for children to engage in the entire statistical problem-solving process, it is not always necessary to complete the entire process. Pieces can be dealt with separately to great effect. For instance, children are naturally curious and inquisitive, so teachers can build off of this tendency to work on the formulate questions part of the process in isolation. If a class is going to a field trip, for example, later in the week, The teacher can ask the children what they are wondering about related to the trip. Suppose the field trip is to the zoo. Children might wonder what animals that they will see, which animals they can feed, or how old are the animals. The teacher can record the children's question and then ask them to consider which question they might be able to answer while they are at the zoo by collecting data. Once they eliminate some questions, they can discuss characteristics of question they can answer with data, and this will likely generate more questions that they can answer with data. This process can also be followed by discussing how one would collect data to answer the question posed even if the data are not actually collected. Similarly, focusing on the interpret results portion of the process can be done with data that have already been collected and displayed, or using published graph from news sources. For example, many teachers keep a classroom display of children's birthdays on the wall all year. Such displays are ripe for interpreting results. The purpose of the interpret results portion of the process is to help children begin to think about variability and its sources. Such, with birthday graph, a teacher can ask children to consider whether a birthday chant in Year 3 classroom or in a retirement home would be likely to look the same or different, and why. Encouraging children to interpret the data they have collected and displayed allows them to gain an understanding of variability and its sources. For instance, if children have collected and graphed the shoes they are wearing, question about whether they would expect the graph to look the same if the data were collected again in 6 months in a secondary school or at a local business. The activities force them to think about what sort of things influence shoe choice. For example, sources of variability. Whether age, location, and vocation of those wearing the shoes all have an influence on the shoes we wear, thus inducing variability. It is important for children, even very young children, to recognize variability and to identify sources of variability. Study revealed that an 8-year-old children were capable of predicting or reading beyond the data. Children at early age of primary school are capable of discerning patterns and making predictions based on bivariate data derived from an experiment. Those facts provide insight into the capabilities of young children, and while they do not speak to youngest learners, they do provide evidence that under appropriate circumstances, young children are quite capable of engaging in the full range of activities of the statistical problem-solving process. With the advent in technology, today some of the young children able to use technology, meaning that a different means to display data simply, clearly, and accurately by using table, charts, or diagrams with appropriate labels and scale. Thus, we should err on the side of expecting more from children rather than less. Teacher support and appropriate technologies likely can enhance what young children can do with data, thus enhance statistical thinking among the young children. As they reach the primary level, teachers and parents have to assist further extend their data sense by placing data into perspective. The concept of mean, average, mode, and median can be introduced to add meaning to numbers. The children can be taught to analyze data and draw meaningful conclusions. Enhancing their skill in data handling will help improving their statistical thinking. At this level, we are instilling a habit of mind. Habit of mind is developed when a person approaches situation in similar ways so that a more general heuristic is accumulated over time. Some specific habits of mind are productive to be engaged while doing statistics. What is a habit of mind? A habit of mind is when we always consider the context of data, ensure the best measure of an attribute of interest, when we anticipate, look for, and describe variation, attend to sampling issues, embrace uncertainty, but build confidence in interpretations, use several on the concept of chances and probability. As if, like, we can ask them, what are the chances of raining today? Of course, the answer would be 50-50 because it has only two answers, which is whether it is rain or it is not rain. But further, you can teach them prediction. You can use time series data to predict what's going to happen today, whether it's rain or not rain. Teachers in school should further enhance their knowledge on how to use statistical elements in analyzing data. What is the meaning of mode, mean, and median? For example, does the mean really represent the actual data? To demonstrate this idea, let's say we have a class of 2 students. One student scored 90 marks and the other scored 10 marks. The class average would be 50, which is good. But if we check further, the data has a large variance and standard deviation. So here it can be concluded mean can represent the actual data, or sometimes it just gives you a wrong demarcation if the standard deviation is large. So teachers need to make the students understand that marks are not merely marks. The marks tell more than numbers. Teachers can use tests as the indication of how much the students understand a particular topic. And for teachers to analyze on how much students understand the topic and what is the remedial action. Don't leave the marks in the record book. It has to be analyzed and inferred so that it will give meanings to it and help the student in achieving a higher performance in their school days. To the students, marks actually show where they are in terms of performance, and to the teachers, student marks indicate how much they understand on the topic they learn. Using the information from data, that is the student's mark, will give you more information rather than merely the numbers. Those numbers will assist teachers in helping the students to improve their performance, and to the students, they should look at the marks and analyze the test paper and help them to improve themselves in particular topics. A very recent example. COVID-19 pandemic changed the way we lead our life. Before the pandemic, if we want to go places, for instance, going to the mall for shopping, we can just turn on the engine and go. But now, things change. If you want to go places, you have to check first your hotspot apps from MySejahtera whether or not the place is a hotspot for COVID-19 cases. If it is so, You might have to cancel your visit as the place is not safe for you. An example is when you want to make online purchases. How can you ensure that your purchase is in the quality you desire? You have to look at the review. Browsing on the reviews is a way to gather information so that it will help in making purchasing decisions. It is all about data and information. This is why statistical thinking had become skill that essential in one's life. Enhancing the skill then become crucial, and each and every one of us must start develop the skills of statistical thinking to lead a better and safer life, and data and information will assist people making a sound and informed decision. At the secondary school level, we are looking at more than data. Teenagers should be taught on more advanced concept of statistics. For example, they should know the concept of good data. Good data is key to answering statistical questions. Without collecting appropriate data, any analysis may not have meaning, and claims made could be based on inappropriate or invalid measures. When collecting data, the measurement should stem from contextual problems. How to best capture the phenomenon of interest with the measurement. For example, students' academic score in a subject might be a proxy for students' learning, but not all of their learning and understanding about the subject. In addition, the use of appropriate tools to collect data, such as the way to pose questions in a survey, is crucial for good data. One might consider if different people making such measurements obtain very similar results, and if the measurement is repeated, would it lead to similar data? In some cases, data have already been collected, and statistical questions of interest stem from the investigation of those data. In such a case, it is important to understand what was being measured and how the data were collected. Students should refer back to the context when considering outliers and missing data in the analysis and interpretation. Moreover, doing statistics means making decisions under uncertainty. If there was no variation in the world, we would not need statistics. In the real world, things vary. For example, mothers do not all have their first child at a certain age. Basketball players' scoring performance varies from distance. The ability to speak the first word among children vary. It is not the same for all of them. Some may start at the age of 1, some may be later, and maybe some much later. Statistics assist us to investigate questions about context in which we anticipate variability. Sources of variation could occur naturally in the context. However, variation can also stem from measurement. For example, the accuracy of a measure or measurement device, sampling, or by data entry errors. Statistical thinking leads to statistical investigation. Statistical investigations seek to explain, predict, and control variation inherent in data. Well-designing sampling helps avoid self-selected or biased samples. Thus, the use of random sampling is important, as well as consideration of the size of a sample. The goal of well-designed study is to explain that something happens just by chance, not by errors. When making final claims or inferences, students should be aware of the variation inherent in data and acknowledge that any decision made from data is under uncertainty. We just can't say for sure that something is certain and true. One important aspect when analyzing data is creating meaningful graphic representation and numerical statistics to examine the structure of the data. It also involves comparing, connecting, changing, and transforming data representations to highlight informative trends or patterns. Different representations can shed light on different aspects of the data. For example, using box plot could display a 5-number summary, overall variation, and possible outliers. However, a dot plot or histogram may be better for displaying how data is clumped and spread out throughout the entire range. Students should be encouraged and afforded opportunities to explore their data using multiple graphical representations, determine which are the most appropriate for data, and observe overall trends. Graphical visualization should precede computing numerical statistics. However, deep analysis should use both visual displays and numerical statistic computations to describe trends and patterns in idea. Now we are looking at the fourth step of statistical process. Number 1 is plan. This is where you formulate a statistical question that can be answered with data. A good deal of time should be given to this step as it is the most important step in the process. Some sort of example of statistical questions are: how tall are the students in my class? How many M&M are in each package? How old are the students in Mrs. Smith's class? And you will expect a variety of correct answers to each of the questions listed above. Statistical questions anticipate variability in the answers, meaning that the correct answer would be different. Step 2 is collecting the data. This is when you design and implement a plan to collect appropriate data. Data can be collected through numerous methods, such as observations, interviews, questionnaires, database, samplings, or experimentation. Randomly collected data will yield the most reliable results and avoid bias. Step 3 is the process, which is the analysis of the data. This is when you organize and summarize the data by graphical or numerical methods. Graph numerical data using histograms, dot plots, box plot, and analyze the strengths and weaknesses of these presented graphical numerical data. The last step is the discussion step, which is where you interpret the results. Interprets your finding from the analysis of data is the context of the original problem. Give an interpretation of how the data answers your original question. The data collected will have a distribution, which can be described by its center, spread, and overall shape. As been said earlier, has an implication for teachers' preparation in the classroom. Teachers cannot teach what they do not know, and most teachers completed their own schooling when data analysis was attended to sparsely or not at all, when most of their experiences revolve around collecting and displaying data, mostly using bar graph and categorical data. Thus, teachers of young children need support in understanding the full statistical problem-solving process and examples of how children can be meaningfully engaged in the entire process. Getting it into perspective, assisted by concrete examples of children's work throughout the process, teachers are further convinced that it is both possible and desirable to place more emphasis on the question and interpret phases. One of the challenges of mathematics teacher education with respect to statistic education is that many of the mathematicians have little experience with statistical education. While they may have received some formal training in statistics, they likely have not been aware of the contemporary move about statistics education. Thus, it is important that teachers broaden their spectrum of statistical thinking. Therefore, it is crucial for the statistic education community to make connections with teachers and parents to broaden their perspective on statistical thinking. Instilling statistical thinking in the preschool, improving the skill when they enter primary school, and enhancing the skills in secondary school will strengthen statistical thinking, and as they lead their life as an adult, the statistical thinking that they build from an early age of their life will help them in making an informed decision. My concluding remark: statistical thinking can be developed starting from as early as they understand words. Therefore, teachers and parents should play their role accordingly and help these children develop their statistical thinking, enhance it so that they become a better person in their life in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Professor Dr. Noriza Hasrin Muslim, for your informative sharing on enhancing statistical thinking among students from preschool to secondary school. Okay, there are 4 steps of statistical process that Dr. Noriza shared with us. First, plan, that we can ask questions, collect to produce data, process to analyze the data, and discuss to interpret the results. All this process plays an important role in statistical thinking among students. Teachers and parents should play their role in ensuring the next generation to view statistics and apply into the real-world perspective. Next, we call upon our facilitator, Associate Professor Dr. Nur Idayu Mahat from Malaysia to give her speech. Associate Professor Dr. Nur Idayu Mahat is the director at the Center for Testing, Measurement and Appraisal, University Utara Malaysia. She's an Associate Professor of Mathematics and Statistics at the same university and actively involved in teaching, research activities, business consulting, and community services. Her major research interests are on classification and pattern recognition, statistical computation, data analytics, visualization. Currently, she is conducting ongoing researches in areas such as enhancing statistical computing with big data, developing analytical dashboard with analytics system, developing psychometric profiling assessment. Also, she has started engaging herself in green and sustainability development projects to express her dedication in creating healthy and better future to life. Welcome, Dr. Nur Idayu Mahat.
Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. I'm Idayu and I'm very grateful to be invited to join this webinar session. So my topic today will be statistical thinking and how to gain interest among those who hate statistics. Nowadays, there are so many communications occur around us. We communicate with our friends through social media. We share contents. We do online purchase through available platforms like Lazada, Shopee, and sometimes we can access to open data. So having data is quite cheap nowadays, and most of this data are in either structured form, semi-structured form, or unstructured form. Structured data means that the data has been arranged into systematic form like a table, while unstructured data contains data that mix with text, emoticons, graphics, and sometimes even audio. So, there is a need to understand this data and convert them into much meaningful report or content that can be understood by many. So, my talk will discuss about what is statistical thinking. We look into the reason why people hate statistics. Then I will touch into some key points that can be understood when we perform statistical investigation especially data investigation. And finally, I'm going to share with some tips on how to love statistics. Statistical thinking is an art to understand complex worlds and putting this information into a simple and straightforward form. So primarily, this kind of thinkings involve mathematics and statistics. But when we deal with real problems, it means we also need some informations or some understandings about the field that we are studying at, such as psychology, engineering, and even education. To accelerate the computation's purposes, usually the statistical thinking include or need to consider the use of computer science. So, what statistics can do? So, most commonly, statistics are used to describe, to decide, and to predict on certain events based on the data at hand. But why people hate statistics? There are many reasons why people hate statistics. So I listed 5 of them. People may find that these topics, especially talking about statistics, is very boring. To understand the concept is another issue. For those who have experience, they found that belief in instinct and experience are much convenient rather than listen to the data. Some also believe that statistics are just a number which can be easily manipulated. Last but not least, statistics is part of math. They love maths, they love statistics, but if they hate maths, they also hate statistics. To get yourself convenience with statistical thinking, so the first step is to get familiarize yourself with some important key. There are 4 basic steps in performing statistical investigation, starting from planning the study, examining the data, making inference from the data, and finally drawing conclusions from your analysis. So when you decide to plan the study, you need to be clear with the ultimate goal of your study. What are the objectives to be reached? How long the study should be taken? What types of variables to be recorded? And how about the samples? How you get the samples? Once you get the samples, then you need to plan how to analyze the data. What kind of pattern that you would like to see from your data? Ask yourself, do you need to perform much complex analysis, or you just want to stop at describing the data? So, having the samples means that you make some inference for your populations. In this phase, make sure that your study can help you to answer the objective. Finally, you can make conclusions from your analysis. Who do you think the conclusion apply? So this is an example of a study which I involved. So the MUET has been long established as the English test for university entrance in Malaysia. It is essential to know how it compares with other established English tests. So this study aimed to compare MUET band score with IELTS band score. Take note that students in Malaysia have to take MUET exams, but not IELTS exam. Therefore, these students must be chosen to be able to sit for both exams. So, in completing the study, the ultimate goal that we want to know is how different between the MUET band scores and the IELTS band scores. This study took 2 years because it involved planning, arranging students to sit for both exams, MUET and IELTS. Okay? When we get the data, We use descriptive statistics to understand the patterns of scores between the MUET exams and the IELTS exams. Then, we need to compare students' performance in these two exams. What actually we need to make some inference that whether students who perform in MUET also perform good in IELTS. But there's a risk that we have to face because we don't want that the low mark scored by students was influenced from their unfamiliarizations with the test. Plus, IELTS examination is a global standard. So, some of the items in this exam may not suitable to be asked to our local students. But very careful plan on this study has enabled us to make a conclusions that for those students who perform good in MUET, they also perform good in the IELTS. Apparently, when you are clear with your study, then you can minimize the risk of making mistake during the collection data process. When you are able to get the data, then it is time to be curious with your data. Apparently, data investigations comprises of these 4 steps. When you get your data, the first thing that you need to do is to understand your data very well. Okay, depends on whatever types of data that you collect. So most of the time, this data comprise dependent control variables. What are variables? In simple form, variables are characteristics that explain your objects. So in this case, we have students as objects, and students are explained by the gender, either male or female, the examination results, okay, mathematics, science and English, and finally, students of which class they belongs to. Right, so then from these variables, we need to distinguish between independent variable, dependent variable, and control. So independent variable refers to variables of which its values is independent of other variables in the study, while dependent variables refer to variables of which their values depend on changes in the independent variable. So in this case, we have mathematics scores, science score, and English grade as independent. But CGPA is dependent variables because the only way you get CGPA is by performing some calculations on the mathematics score, science score, and the English grade. If you look carefully in this data, we may find that some variables are in terms of numbers, but others are in terms of alphabet. Gender represented by male and female, English grade represented by the score with A, B, C. Okay, but mathematics and science are in terms of numeric. So this is what we need to understand about our variable. Okay, our variable may comprises of one of these types of measurements: nominal, ordinal, interval, or ratio. Understanding your measurements will help you to determine suitable statistics tools to use further. Perhaps the best way to understand your data is by converting table form into much easy kind of display. So for example, in this, I plot the English result and the science results, okay, in a scatter metric, in a scatter display. Then I can see that there are five groups, okay, five groups. But the question is what these groups are referring at. Then it means that I need to dig to go further, carry out much more analysis to recognize what are the behavior of our student that can explain about these 5 groups. Now I include students' gender and also their class. Now, if I put together, you can see that male and female are scattered, but the blue colors and red colors, which represent students' class, can be seen quite separated, okay, like this. Then it could help me to understand why, okay, the blue groups are scored less than those in red. This is where we need to think beyond on how to understand our data. So, distribution thinking helps you to understand your data better. Sometimes we may face with uncertainty in various aspects of our data. Okay, for the examples that we have discussed just now, we discovered that the blue student from blue class and the red class scored quite different in terms of their science and English examinations. So then we might ask ourselves, are they really different? So to answer on this certainty, that where the statistical significance comes into the picture. Okay, let's discuss about these examples. So let's say students marked with red are those who undergo online learning with one-to-one supervisions, while students marked with blue are those who undergo online learning without supervisions. So we know this study, students are tested with 2 different experiments. Okay, one with online with one-to-one supervisions, and the other groups only with online learning without supervisions. So they sit for the science and English test, and then the results are recorded. Okay, so when we plot these scores, then we discovered that students from blue, okay, blue means that they undergo online learning without supervisions, apparently score less in science and English compared to those students who sit for both online learning and one-to-one supervisions. But the question is the red group really different from the blue group? And what level of confidence to believe with these results? So statistical significance help you to answer to this uncertainty. Okay, usually in statistical course, we discuss different types of statistical tests very detailed. But for this talk, I just put everything here so that you can see that different objectives will lead to different statistical tests. Is it necessary to remember all these tests? The answer is no. But what you need to do is make sure you're clear with what objective you would like to achieve, and then you can choose the pool of methods that are available. Okay, so for examples, if we need to test a claim about the populations, okay, for example, in this second row, then you have some option to choose to use t-test, z-test, chi-square test, and actually there are other more tests available. Often I was asked whether it is necessary to remember whether we need to perform t-test or z-test, or we need to perform chi-square test if it's related to this claim. My answer is that make sure you understand your data first. If your data contains numeric data, and you have a belief that your data follows certain type of distributions like normal distributions, then it is worth to consider t-test or z-test. But if we are talking about rank data okay, or category data of which we don't want to be restricted by so much assumptions, then you can switch to non-parametric test statistics. So don't worry to put much effort, okay, to learn all these possible statistics at once. Okay, but you can start to learn one by one, like a baby step, so that you won't feel burdened to remember all. Okay, next, after understand your data and then you perform certain tests to reveal your uncertainty, then it is time to make sure whether you can make some generalizations from your findings. Okay, so what is actually generalizability? Okay, these can be defined as the extensions of your research findings, whether whatever results obtained from samples collected from your study can represent the actual behavior at the populations. Okay, looking back at the examples that I showed you just now, we are talking about sample of students involved in the study, and we discovered that the two groups are different. But the question is whether the two approaches tested in the study, okay, one, students who attended online learning with one-to-one supervision versus to the other group that only attend for online learning. Okay, whether these two can difference, then the generalizability that we would like to make is whether these two approaches are different or not. So how to answer these generalizability issues? It's actually quite abstract. Okay, but believe me, if you collect more data and keep on performing testing, much of the time you get a similar answer. So it means that yes, okay, the approach that when we teach our students online learning with face-to-face supervision is much better than only students attending the online learning. Okay. My third point in statistical thinking is to start to learn and believe with your data. Try to learn to make conclusions derived from whatever findings you obtain at the analysis stage. Do not overstate your results. I give you two examples here to show the mistake made by researchers when they want to conclude their findings. For the first example, this teacher wants to know which online games that their students like best. The problem is she asked only 30 students from her class to rate 10 listed online games, and the top 5 listed game has been concluded as the top famous game among the students. Now, how can the 30 students represent all students? For the second example, this researcher tried to prove that a student who took vitamin B complex every day performs better in a class than students who didn't take that vitamins. Although she might able to get many students involved, but the problem is her study only consider the two aspects, okay, whether students taking vitamin B complex or not. Perhaps she should look into other possibility that might influence her study. For example, students who take vitamin B complex could be attending tuition class or spend more time for revisions, and from team study, such they get better results, which actually part contribute to good performance. From the three key points that I have shared just now, some of you might still find that it's hard with statistics. Well, let me put more tips to assist you to learn statistics. Okay? First, whenever you want to analyze your data, always start by making a storytelling. Plan what you like your analysis would be, how it looks like. Make a story about it. Okay? So emphasize the importance that you would like to share, but not cramming the information from the data you have. Then, whenever you want to try and get yourself familiar with statistical method, always start with simple method first, like descriptive statistics, rather than jumping into much complex methods. Now, in class, we often teach our students statistics by using pen, paper, and calculator. Now, we are already in industrial revolutions. Open source are available, so you could use them. Start using in the classroom and also start use them with your data. Okay, curiosity is another important thing that you must instill whenever you face with your data. But remember, do not force yourself to complex methods. Solve real problems, not solve statistic problems. That's what you have to understand. Most of the time, when we have a data, we are too eager to explain, to find things from our data. But yet, when it's come to make conclusions, we are able to do so because we don't understand the problem wisely. So please, always understand your problem first before understand the statistics. Finally, it's quite boring to solve problems alone. So get a team, discuss with your team. Sometimes you can debate on choosing the right methods. Okay? So I hope at least these six points could help you to at least reconsider of choosing statistics and implement statistical thinking whenever you have data in your hand. Okay, this is another example that I would like to share when I conduct my classroom. Okay, I put my student in a situation where they need to be an investigator searching for a tip. Okay, the story is like this. One day, a man has been arrested for stealing many of his neighbor's chickens who runs a domestic poultry farm. But he claimed that the chicken meat in his freezer actually came from wild chickens. So Professor Z, okay, another identity that I introduced in my classroom, was called in a court trial to prove that the meat in the freezer were domestic chickens. So let's imagine if you were Professor Z, what would you do? Then I create working diary for Professor Z, helping my students to understand these are the steps that they need to consider when they want to prove whether the man actually stealing his neighbor meat. Okay, so first we set the goal. So the goal in this work, in this investigation, is to differentiate between domestic chicken and wild chicken. What makes these two kinds of chickens are different? Well, we could say that some variables in these two types of chicken could be varied. Okay, in terms of bones, okay, in terms of weight. Now, let's go to the samples. Take a sample from domestic chickens, of course from the neighbor, and some sample from the wild chicken. They train our students that in statistics, most often our sample should be chosen or should be taken at random. Then, what to record? Okay, imagine that you have chicken in front of you, so you need to read length and width of the bones, okay, and then label whether that chicken is actually domestic chicken or wild chicken. So having data in hand, then we can start on analyze the data. So bring your students with examples to analyze the data, and finally we perform comparison to distinguish whether there's a difference between wild chicken and domestic chickens in terms of measurements. And finally, what can be concluded? So when you have this kind of storyboard to be shared with your students, at least they know that statistics is not only about having number in front and then do the analysis, but it's like another investigator that searching for the correct way to answer certain questions. So it is come to the end of my session. Here I share with you some books which can be referred at when you want to learn a little bit and create more understanding on statistical thinking. And if you have time, you could subscribe to these two YouTube channels where I discovered that this channel tried their best to explain statistics in much fun and simple ways. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay. Thank you, Associate Professor Dr. Nur Idayu Mahat, for your great sharing on how to gain interest among those who hate statistics. From main three key points, which are get familiarized with important points, be curious with the data, and learn to believe the data, gives a broad picture on how we can pull the interest of statistical learning can be applied in many ways. Okay. Now, before we continue with our last session of this webinar, let's have a break with our photo session. So, for all the participants and viewers, please open the video that we can get a few snaps with our speaker and participant as well.
Please on your videos.
Please on your videos. ICT team. Stop sharing. Stop sharing. Stop sharing. Yes. And put a big smile on your face. Our beloved ICT team, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone ready?
Hold on.
Okay, hold on. 1, 2, 3.
First page, we have 4. 1, keep smiling. 1,
Keep smiling, sir.
Keep smiling.
keep smiling, everyone. Okay, keep smiling.
Keep smiling, everyone. We have a few snaps.
So please switch on your webcam. Yeah.
Please switch on your webcam, your videos, that we can see your picture, your lovely picture, and put a big smile on your face. We have a few snaps with our speakers.
Let's pick another one. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
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 Thank you.
Thank you to all.
Okay.
Okay.
Share பண்றேன்.
Yes. Thank you.
Share.
Okay, last but not least, we call upon our facilitator, Mr. Ashwan Bandrun Kurnia from Indonesia, to give his speech. Mr. Ashwan Bandrun Kurnia is a lecturer in mathematics education at STKIP PGRI Jombang, Indonesia, and a PhD candidate in the Faculty of Education at the University of Canberra, Australia. He's working on developing an assessment framework to investigate Indonesia high school students' statistical literacy. His PhD study is looking in details at the student statistical literacy level and the student strategies in responding to database information. Mr. Ashwan Bandrun Kurnia holds a master's from the University of Sriwijaya, Indonesia, in collaboration with Utrecht University, the Netherlands, focusing on design research and realistic mathematics education (RME). Welcome, Dr. Ashwan Bandrun Kurnia.
Thank you very much for inviting me as one of the speakers in this webinar on statistical thinking. It's really a great pleasure to present about lessons that we can gain from students' responses to problems based on data. And to start this presentation, saya rasa perlu menyapa dulu sahabat-sahabat di Malaysia. Perkenalkan, nama saya Badrun dari Indonesia. Selamat pagi dan apa kabar semuanya? Alhamdulillah, semoga selalu dalam keadaan sehat walafiat di tengah pandemi COVID-19. The outline for today's presentation begins with an introduction in which I will explain the definition of statistical literacy and also the existing assessments that assess students' understanding of statistics. We then move to lesson 1, and in this part, we are going to look at PISA report and not the overall report, but we will be focusing on one subskill, that is the uncertainty and data. And for the next lesson, we will have a close look at the student responses to one database item that I'm going to use as an example. And finally, let's make any conclusion related to the students' responses. Before I talk further about the statistical literacy, it's important to say in the beginning that in this field of studies, there are 3 terms that sometimes are used interchangeably. They are statistical literacy, statistical reasoning, and the last, statistical thinking. Although some researchers have tried to distinguish them through different definitions getting published, until now we can easily find that actually there are still definitions that overlap each other. And for today's presentation, we don't need to consider all that definition. We only need to focus on definition, some of definition of statistical literacy. And now let's begin from the definition by Wellman, 1993. From her definition, at least there are 4 points to highlight. The first point is the fact that statistical information is everywhere around us. And therefore, statistically literate students are expected to be able to understand statistical results, are expected to be able to critically evaluate statistical results. And that means statistically literate students shouldn't take the statistical information they encounter for granted. Wellman also mentioned about statistical thinking and related to professional and personal decision. The second definition that we are going to use is from Gall 2004. I would say that every word in his definition is important to highlight. But for today's presentation, we'll be only focused on the 3 points. The first one is Gall defines statistical literacy as basic principle for participation in society where decision-making is based on critical skills. And the second is statistically literate people should be able to critically evaluate statistical information both verbally or in writing. And the last, statistically literate people, of course, including students here, should be able to express their opinions regarding statistical information both in verbally or writing. And from the 2 definitions, from many important points to highlight, it can be summarized that the definition of statistical literacy is about how to be a critical data consumers, how to be a critical data readers. And it involves the ability to understand statistical information, ability to critically evaluate, ability to make decisions, and finally, ability to express opinions regarding statistical information. And this perspective, the perspective of data consumers that I'm going to use for today's presentation. And this is in line with Gall that said most of citizens, including students, are data consumers, not data producers. And now let's have a look at some assessments that assess students' statistical literacy. The first, we have the guideline for assessment and instruction in statistics education, abbreviated as GAIS. And the second, we have the levels of conceptual understanding in statistics, abbreviated as LOCUS. These 2 assessments have been developed and utilized in the United States. The third one, we have Mooney, and the fourth one, we have Watson and Cunningham. And the last 2, we have 2 international mathematics tests, TIMSS and PISA. The reasons why TIMSS and PISA are included on the list is because they have a collection of problems that assess students' understanding about statistics. Moreover, they have also the report on them, so that's why I consider to be important to involve them here on the list. These 6 assessments have a different construct, and they also have a different levels to characterize the student's statistical literacy. Let's take the first example from Watson and Cunningham. Watson and Cunningham assessed students in Australia to measure their statistical literacy for grade 3 and 9 in year 2003. And they also conducted another study in 2017 to measure students in grade 5 to 11 literacy. And they developed 6 levels, 6 hierarchical levels to characterize the students' statistical literacy. And more importantly, many researchers in the field have utilized these 6 hierarchical levels and use it to analyze or characterize the students' statistical literacy level in their countries. The lowest level developed by Watson and Cunningham, they call it as idiosyncratic level, and the highest level, they call it as a critical mathematical level. And now let's have a look at the PISA. PISA also have 6 different levels, but a little bit different to what Watson and Cunningham developed. And not all the PISA have this report. Only PISA 2003 and PISA 2012 have the report on the students' understanding on statistics. Because in PISA 2003 and PISA 2012, the test focused on mathematics. And now let's have a look at the PISA report 2003. In this report, among the participating countries, it seemed that there were only 2 Southeast Asian countries participated, and they were Indonesia and Thailand. And unfortunately, they both were on the last 5 on the rank. In Thailand, the students, around 50% of students could already achieve level 2 and above, while another 50% of the students only achieve level 1 and below level 1. Here we have a below level 1 because there are some students who couldn't achieve level 1 descriptors. That's why there is a report that categorized some of the students under below 1, and we call it below level 1 level. And as you can see, Indonesian students perform even very poor, by around 70% of the students only achieve level 1 and below level 1. And the rest, around 30% of the students, Indonesian students, could achieve level 2 and above, but unfortunately, there was no student that could achieve the level 6, the highest level in PISA. And in contrast, some countries that are on the top rank, such as Finlandia, Netherlands, Canada, and Korea, the students in those countries perform quite well to solve the problems that ask them about statistical understandings. And around 90% of students can achieve level 2 and above. And only few students in those countries that only achieve level 1 and below level 1. And the next question is, what happened to the next 9 years? After PISA 2003 test, there was PISA 2012 test that also focused on mathematics and have the report similar to this. And now let's have a look to the PISA 2012 report. There were more countries participating, and Indonesia was still there. And now, not only Indonesia, we can now see Malaysia, because Malaysia joined this PISA 2012. And now let's have a look at the distribution of the students in this report. In Malaysia, the students around 50% already achieve level 2 and above, and a few of them can achieve the highest level, which is level 6. And another 50% of the Malaysian students were still in level 1 and below 1. What happened to Indonesian students? Nothing different, not really have a difference with the PISA 2003 result, that the Indonesian students, around 70% of them only achieve level 1 and below, and the rest, they already achieve level 2 and above. And here, the only difference is a few students already achieve in level 6, the highest level. And then, what lessons that we can learn from this report? And the answer is, we need to look at the descriptors for PISA level 1. And the descriptors for level 1, students can identify and read information presented in a small table and a simple graph. What does it mean? It means a student in level 1, they just only able to solve the problem if the problem utilize or involve or contain a simple graph or simple table. But if the graph or table are more complex, they tend to fail to answer incorrectly the problems. And also, we can make some conclusion that the students in below level 1 level means that they couldn't solve any problem that relate to the, I would say, yeah, they couldn't solve any problem. They might be that involve any representation, even very simple representation. And actually, as information, this year, 2021, actually, PISA test should be conducted with the focus on mathematics. But unfortunately, the official just announced on the website that the PISA 2021 will be postponed until next year, and they call it PISA 2022, and the focus will be on mathematics. We should wait until the test and the report getting published to see the students' performance, especially in Malaysia and Indonesia. If the performance still this low, it means that our students need more and more attention. As an educators, we should help them to be more statistically literate and ready for giving response, appropriate response when they encounter the statistical information or statistical result. And then after knowing the student performances on statistical items, then what we want to know more from the students. I think their responses to statistical items will inform us their thought process and also even more their strategies when they solve the problems. I got these two similar items, one from the paper by Sharma and friends, and another one from Indonesian mathematics textbook for grade 8. And this item is about running competition, 100 meter, 7 races, and there are 3 runners. And the times for the 3 runners are presented or recorded in the table. The question asks the student to select one best runner for the next championships, but not only that, the student should explain why they choose that one runner to compete in the next championships. And these two versions of item, these two versions of problems quite similar in other. What I can notice, the difference is how many races. So in the Sharma version, there are 7 races, but in Indonesian mathematics textbook, only 6 races. And then after analyzing the 2 versions, finally I decided to make some changes to make this item more challenging for the students. And by changing the times recorded for the students and having trend for one of 2 of the runners. And the expected response is the students can calculate the mean, and because there were 2 runners that have the same mean value, then the student have to find are expected to have to find another strategy to select one best runner. And as information, I conducted a test using this item to 48 students at year 9. And now let's have a look at one of the responses from the student. Okay, I consider these responses as express the student's solid understanding of the problem. And before we come to the analysis, we try to read what this student did on the table and what this student wrote on the box. In the table, it seemed to me that the student performed some calculation, most likely addition, and also to find the total time recorded for each runner. And finally, this student used that total time to find the mean by dividing it by 7, because there are 7 races. And the student chose Sarah, and the reason is because Maria, the time she needed is longer than previous, so the mean is equal to Sarah. Okay, so if I provide some interpretation to these responses, to the reasons this student provide, this student chose Sarah because this student understand that Sarah and Maria have the same mean value. But because Maria getting slower and slower from race 1 to race 7, so this student decided to choose Sarah. That in fact, Sarah always perform quicker and quicker from race 1 to race 7. And this student didn't consider about Rita because I think this student understand that Rita have the highest mean value compared to Sarah and Maria. Therefore, I use this example as students to exemplify the student's solid understanding, because the student can calculate the total time accurately, can calculate the mean correctly, and can recognize that Sarah and Rita have the same mean, and recognize that Rita's mean is the biggest than the other 2 runners, and finally can provide appropriate reason why choosing Sarah instead of Maria. And now let's move to the second student. Let's do something similar to the previous one. Let's see what this student have in the table and also in the box. Okay, in the table, this student seem to have a checklist in race 1 to race 4. This student checklisted the time for Rita. And for race 5 to race 7, the student checklisted the time recorded for Maria. And I also can see here the equal signs, but unfortunately I couldn't find any calculation by the student. The only answer is here. It seems the student chose Rita, and the reason is because has won 4 races. Okay, if we try to relate the 4 races, most likely because Rita have a 4 checklist here from race 1 to race 4. But in fact, this is the biggest time compared to the other 2 runners. And it means that the student have a misunderstanding in choosing that the best runner for each race is the one who have the biggest one. And therefore, I classify this example, this response to exemplify the student's common misunderstanding. Why? Because this student failed to understand the context. What I mean is like the context of running, and also incorrectly determine the winner of each race by choosing the one who have the biggest times recorded, and finally using the mode but improperly to choose one best runner. And now we can look to the third example of the student responses. And this student have the same strategy to the previous one, have a checklist in the table, but the difference is the student have all checklisted time for Rita across the 7 races. And if we look at to the answer, this student explained that I just write it for you. The explanation is I choose the above table chose Rita because Rita, the first race, she got the highest votes, and the second race, she also got the highest votes. Rita got the highest vote, but the sixth race, and 5 and 7 got the lowest vote. Well, from the response, we understand that these students understand about comparison, the biggest one and the smallest number probably in each race, but these students have a problem by understanding the context. This student talks about the votes. In fact, this item only is about the running competition. So I use this response to exemplify students' common misunderstanding. Why? Because it seems that there is no engagement at all to the context. That's all the three examples of the responses of the students to the problems that assess their ability to decide or choose one of the best runners among the three runners. And now we try to conclude what lesson that we can learn from the three responses. And now let's have a look at theory and by Gall and by Watson. Both Gall and Watson agree that there are many components that can influence the student's statistical literacy. And I don't, in this occasion, I will not to talk about all that components, but we will only focus on some of components that's similar in both theories. And the first one is literacy skills, statistical knowledge, mathematical knowledge, and contextual knowledge. These four components have like a contribution to the lowest or the highest level of the student statistical literacy. If we relate to the previous examples from the three students, I would say that the students' understanding about the context should be reflected by the students' solid understanding of the running competition and determine who is the winner for each race. And about the students' statistical knowledge, they should understand the concept of data measure of center that involve a mean, mode, and median. And they should be able to show a full understanding which of the data measure of center is the most appropriate one. And for the mathematical knowledge, can be shown by the student's ability to perform addition using the decimal numbers, and also to perform the division when they calculate the mean value. And also for the literacy skills, of course, they should be able to understand all the words in the problem and also have an ability to write or express their thinking. I think that's all what we can conclude from today's presentation. And if you have any question, feel free to ask, and I'm happy to answer if I can. And thank you. See semuanya.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ashman Bandung Punia, for your prominent and informative sharing on lessons from the students' responses to database items. We learned many information about lessons from the students' responses to database items. Many factors impact students' responses in terms of knowledge elements and dispositional elements, and both connected to statistical literacy. Statistical literacy gives a lot understanding on ability to understand and critically evaluate statistical results that impact our daily life. Now we will open the floor for our Q&A session from participants. So all the participants and viewers can post your questions in our chat box, either in WebEx or YouTube. Any questions from our participants? You can post your questions in our chat box, in WebEx chat box or YouTube chat box. Any questions?
Ya, I tanya.
You can ask questions to our speakers here. Okay, there's a question from our WebEx link. To all the presenters, if you were asked to explain the difference between the null and the alternative hypothesis, is the most simple way possible. How will you go about it? Our respective speakers. We have a question from in the WebEx chat box to all the presenters. If you were asked to explain the difference between the null and the alternative hypothesis in the most simple way possible, now how could you go about it?
Panggil dulu person. Panggil dulu anak.
Alright,
Our
Siva, this is Dr. Idayu.
yes, Dr. Idayu.
To the editors, yeah. So yes, usually when I teach my statistics, so the most common question will be what's the difference between the null hypothesis and the alternative hypothesis to layman. Okay, put right this. The null hypothesis, okay, bear in mind, hypothesis is all about statement that we need to investigate. Okay, usually null hypothesis refers to the current statement that commonly agreed by all. But alternative hypothesis is a statement of which you want to prove as a new, you want to prove as a new, I would say like something that you want to investigate. So usually your investigation would be find evidence how to prove that your statement can be accepted. So that's actually hypothesis alternative.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nur Idayu Mahat. Anyone, if you want to ask questions, you can raise your hand also and open your video, or you can post your questions in our chat box. Anything from YouTube? Okay. So, anything from YouTube? So, Dr. Batrul or Dr. Noliza, if you have anything for the first question that's asked in our chat box, and if you have anything to share with us, you can share with us. Please unmute. Yes, Dr. Noliza.
To me, when I teach my students regarding null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, the simplest way to tell them the null hypothesis is the hypothesis that we want to check, and the alternative hypothesis is the hypothesis that the things that we want to prove right, some sort like the things that we intend to accept. Maybe the way we say it to them in a simpler word will make them understand better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Noliza. Mr. Batrul?
Yes, Siva. So I will not answer the question directly. That's a very challenging question, I think. But what I want to add from the previous presenters is like, according to my reading, we can classify that actually, if we talk about the statistics, statistical thinking or everything, we can classify into two, from the perspective of data consumers and also from the perspective of data producers. So the question relates to the data producers, But if we want to teach the student to be responsive on the data they encounter, their daily life, they can increase their critical understanding on the statistic to be data readers. So I think I just want to add that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Badrul. Okay, if there's no other questions from our participants.
Another one.
I got another one question?
From Webex.
Okay, we have question from Webex chat box. Okay, from Dr. Wan Nur Azmin, how to inculcate statistical reasoning among our school students? Because sometimes I found that students do not know how to interpret statistical data. Over to you. Any Doctor, any of our speakers? We can. Dr. Noliza, Dr. Nur Idayu, Mr. Badrul. We have questions in our Webex chat box. How to inculcate statistical reasoning among our school students, because sometimes I found that students do not know how to interpret statistical data.
Okay, can I answer the question?
Yes, Mr.
Okay, so that's really a good question. After we know the level of the student reasoning, so if I take one, in PISA there are 6 levels as I presented, and also in another framework like Watson and Cunningham, they also have a 6 levels also. So if we try, probably we can start by like a predictive test, give some 1 or 2 problems to the students and characterize what level they are. If the students can provide like good reasoning and show in level 6 understanding, it means they already have like ability to interpret the data. But if the students show level 1 or level 2 or level 3 reasoning, I think as a teacher, we can make a reflection and also design some lesson that can address the students' responses to have a higher and higher level of understanding or show the reasoning. I think that's from my point of view.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Badrul. Okay, we have a question from our YouTube participants in a YouTube chat box. What factors do we consider in terms of appropriacy in using statistics as instructional material for young learners? Okay, what factors do we consider in terms of appropriacy in using statistics as instructional material for young learners? This is a question from our YouTube participant. Dr. Noliza.
Sorry, would you please come again with the question?
Yes, sure. What factors do we consider in terms of appropriacy in using statistics as instructional material for young learners?
The beginning one. Sorry.
What are the factors? What are the factors that we consider?
Factors. Okay.
Yes, factors. Yes.
Okay. The first, the most and important factor is that when you write instruction to younger children, like in the primary school or in the preschool, then the instruction must be simple, lucid, and precise. You have to tell them what to do, and you have to let them to know that what steps that they have to take into account. So the language factor is very, very important, as if the language is vague and not clear, then the children will not know what to do. So to me, the most important factor is the language that you use in your instruction, so that it has to be more relaxed and more informal rather than giving them the bombastic words pertaining to statistics itself.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Noliza. Dr. Nur Idayu, any opinion or comments from Doctor about these questions?
Yes, I also agree that language play important role to get students familiarized with what actually you ask. But at the same time, look at the example that you would like to share with your students. Make sure that your student familiar with the situations. Okay, for young learners, maybe if you choose examples or situation or scenario that they never been exposed to. So maybe it's hard for them to understand. Okay, for example, it's like avoid use real problems out of the education out school context. So like what Dr. Ahmad shared just now in his presentation, he used like common like like sports, science content that also teach in the school. So that makes students familiar. So don't use some things like beyond their daily or routine day activities.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nur Idayu. Anything to add from Mr. Badrun? Anything to add, Mr. Badrun, from about this question?
I think not. The true presenters already addressed that question.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Badrun. Okay, any other questions from our participants? Okay, so if there's no other questions from our participants.
Yang baru tu dah baca kan? Free tu dah
Oh,
baca dah.
okay. Sorry, we have one more questions from Jeffrey V. Guardiola to everyone, to our presenters. What will be the most appropriate software to be used in data analysis for students in tertiary level? How about in high school level? Any of our speaker, Dr. Nur Idayu?
Okay, this is my favorite question.
Okay.
Okay, why? Because I realized that I'm not sure in tertiary educations, right? I still realize that some of my friends still depends on calculator, pen and paper, to solve to do some calculation related to statistics. Technically, there are many available software, not just now. So if you have a Google account, so you can choose Google Analytics, and currently there is a new one launched, Google Data Studio. Google Data Studio, whereby you can you can create fun in your class. Okay, get your student with the data and ask them to portray whatever they want to with the Google Data Studio. Others, that's for data visualization, means that students want to draw to create a bar chart, pie chart, whatever charts. Okay, so you can expose them to that. Okay, other than that, which is I noticed that in Malaysia, some school already exposed to their student with a little bit high on the analysis, data analysis through open source platform like R and Python. But this is only for students who really eager with the programming. But other than that, you can Google with the data analysis open source, okay, which actually is free. But the simplest is a Google platform.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Idayu. So I have a question for our respectable speakers. Okay, how do you encourage young learners to love statistics? Because there's a lot of people who doesn't want to learn statistics. They thought statistics is very, very hard. So how actually we can encourage our young learners to love statistics? Any of our speaker, Dr. Nur Idayu?
I respond first because I'm doing a lot of work regarding this kind of things, you see, like instilling statistical thinking from the beginning of it. So at first I was experimented this statistical thinking thing with my children, and now I did it with my grandchildren. So first and foremost, you have to do it informally. You have to do it with something that they like, and whatever they did, you have to get them on doing it as a form of information seeking and getting data from that information that they encounter or they observe, and try to get them to a discussion that leads to some sort like data interpretation and also drawing conclusion. So you cannot do it like very in formal situation. you have to start it off with an informal situation, that you have to bring them out a lot. Of course, MCO will forbid them to do that for a moment. But I always take into account like making a habit that when the children turn 2, then I will bring them to the zoo and, you know, to aquarium or some such things like that places. When they turn 6, I bring them to petroscience, a science center and whatnot, just to get them to be familiar with statistical thinking itself. And whenever I bring them to movies, watching TV, watching cartoon for the list, I always encourage them to recorded information, recorded what they see, recorded what they understand, but they did it in a subconscious way, not knowing that I am training them for statistical thinking, but they did it for the sake of doing it as part of their life. So I observe them when they grow older. So I start to begin to explain to them like what they did when they were small is actually the process in getting data, interpret data and draw conclusion. And when they grow much older, so I will tell them that what they are doing is actually a statistical process. So I found that when they grow older, their statistical thinking acumen is much, much better than those friends at their age.
Thank you so much, Dr.
I hope that it helps you.
Yes, yes. It's very, very, very informative sharing from Dr. Noliza. So, any other questions?
Ada satu yang belum jawab lagi kan? Cuba buka dekat Webex. There is one by atas.
One questions.
Can you scroll? Can you scroll?
Okay,
Jangan.
I think no,
Bawah sikit. Inculcate tu dah ke?
Dah.
How to inculcate?
Dah.
Ada satu yang belum. I think. Can you read?
Okay,
we check first.
Okay, we have one more question actually from our specialist. Is it? Okay, sorry. We have one more question from our YouTube participants. Okay. Aside from Google Data Studio, what other education technology tools will you recommend in teaching statistics, especially in our remote online learning setup? Any of our speakers? Mr. Badrul, Dr. Nur Idayu?
Can you repeat the question, please, Siva?
Yes. Hold on. Okay, sorry. Okay, the question is, what other educational technology tools will you recommend in teaching statistics, especially in our remote online learning setup?
Okay, I'm not sure about the ICT education in school right now, but one way to get your student to their hands, okay, actually to use the available when you purchase laptop, you already get the Excel. So the Excel actually is quite powerful compared to like Google Analytics, where Google Analytics is more like a drive method. Okay, where you get data and then you can drive the data and just draw whatever chart you would like to do. But if you want a student to get used and think the process, Excel is one of the options, because inside there you can look at how the students do creatively do their work, do the calculation manually, and then transform that into simple visualizations.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Nur Idayu. Okay, we have a question from our YouTube viewers. Okay, how
Siva,
yes.
Sorry, can I add a little bit about that question? So,
yes.
If the problem is about the remote online learning, so probably the most problem is about the internet connection. So I agree with a previous presenter that we should use like the offline application. So apart from the Excel that also that have a powerful method to do statistics, we also have like GeoGebra. So one feature in GeoGebra, they also offer you about the probabilistic and statistic, and they also have the figure there, the illustration, so you can make that very usable for you if you don't have a good internet connection. I think that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Badrum. Okay, we have another question from our YouTube viewers. Okay, how we can put more emphasis on appropriate usage of the different statistical measure discussed. So, any of our speaker would like to answer the question? Okay, how we can put more emphasis on appropriate usage of the different statistical measure discussed. Dr. Nur Hidayat?
All right. This, okay, bear in mind, okay, statistics actually comprises three major strategies. So once, I think most of you very commonly know about the parametric approach. So bear in mind, parametric approach is quite traditional because it was designed, most of the methods and parametric methods were designed a long time ago, when people start understands about the probability, when people start designing the distribution type of distributions, so that's where the parametric tools comes. But as the technology become much cheaper, okay, and the computations can be done very easily. Now, the tools become diverse now. We have semi-parametric methods, we also have non-parametric methods, and currently we also have what we call a simulated version methods. Okay, maybe these are some things that are quite new to most of us, but the way how to choose tools is not to choose tools at the beginning before you get the data, but it has to be choose once you confirm with your data, understand your data first. What kind of measurements you handle at the moment, not too much worry on the distribution technically, unless if you need to perform statistical testing, then you need to consider even statistical testings. Previously we have to depend on normal distributions, but nowadays we have like a bootstrap approach, we have other numerical approach to assist. So bear in mind, whenever you want to teach your students, don't I don't know how in classroom how this goes, but in higher education, in university, the way we teach students is to understand the data first, and from the data we choose the methods, not another way around.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Nur Hidayat. Mr. Badru, anything to add on it?
No, enough, I think.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Badru. Dr. Noliza? Any comments from Dr. Noliza about the question?
The last one?
No, I think it's fine.
Okay, thank you to our speakers. Okay, done. Okay, so any other questions from our participants? Okay, thank you so much. Now we close our Q&A session from our participants. Okay, so we cover a lot of information about statistical thinking application in education. Our facilitators share abundant knowledge and information with us. I hope all of you enjoy the webinar and experience a clear picture of statistical thinking application in education. We would like to know your feedback, so all participants who are using WebEx or YouTube Live for this webinar, please fill up the evaluation form of this webinar. We will post the evaluation form link at the chat box. We will close the evaluation form after this webinar and we will close after 2 hours. Okay, we will close the evaluation form after 2 hours the webinar end. Okay, thank you so much to our facilitators and participants for making this event a great success. Okay, Before we end our lovely webinar, I would like to take this golden opportunity to share with all of you that Senior is organizing an international conference, COSMET 2021, as well as pre-conference workshops. For more details on our conference and pre-conference workshops, please refer to our COSMET website. So I will share the COSMET website with all of you. Okay, this is our COSMET website. So please do visit our COSMET website for further information. So last but not least, thank you to all. Till we meet again for our next webinar from Senior. Thank you.
Goodbye lah, goodbye.
Bye. Goodbye. See you all soon in our next.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, our facilitators, Dr. Nur Ifayu, Mr. Badrun, Dr. Noliza. Thank you so much for your informative sharing with us. Thank you to all the participants.
Jangan tutup dulu pulpit tu. Jangan tutup.
Stay safe, stay healthy to everyone.
Tutup dulu.